Good morning. Good morning and welcome. This time each year, the board begins to consider those issues related to any boundary studies in the capital improvements program. During today's meeting, the superintendent will present her recommended fiscal year 2024 capital budget and amendments to the FY 2023 through 2028 capital improvements program, along with Supplement A, the superintendent's recommendation for Clarksburg Elementary School number 9 boundaries. Subsequently, the board will hold work sessions on November 1st and November the 10th, as well as hearings for the public to provide testimony on November the 3rd, November the 9th, and November the 14th. The hearing on November the 3rd is also for those wishing to provide testimony regarding the boundary study of Clarksburg Elementary School number 9. The hearings will be held in person and will be open to the public with limited capacity. The board will also accept pre-recorded audio and video submissions for individuals who wish to remain virtual. Information about our meeting and hearing schedule, how to sign up online for the hearings, and how to submit testimony is available on our website. If alternatives are offered during the work sessions, the board will hold a hearing on November the 15th. Again, the November the 15th hearing will only be held if alternatives are offered on either November the 1st or November the 10th. So anyone interested in submitting testimony, sign-ups are open to speak during the aforementioned hearings. The board will meet on November 17th to make its decisions on the CIP. In terms of today's meeting, the superintendent will present her CIP. If there are items the superintendent is recommending that board members wish to modify, it would be helpful for affected communities to know about any potential alternative prior to the public hearings. Therefore, I'm encouraging that we identify any alternatives by the November 1st work session. Before I turn the meeting over to Dr. McKnight, I just want to remind board members that this is the superintendent's presentation of the CIP. Although clarifying questions are in order, we will have an opportunity to explore in more depth and ask questions during the next work sessions. Thank you. Dr. McKnight, you may continue.
All right. Good morning, board members. Good to see you all. At this time, I'm going to welcome our staff down, Mr. Adams and Ms. Carmijas, to the table. We heard from many of our community members last week when the CIP came out. You know, they were very much engaged and looking to see what the information was. So I just want to thank our communications office, our schools, for making sure that our parents were able to get access to those booklets. I know they look forward to them every year so that they can then begin to look at how their particular communities are going to be impacted. So the fiscal year 2024 is the second year of the biennial capital improvements program review process. And in accordance with the Montgomery County Charter, all CIP projects are considered in odd number fiscal years. In the even number years, only projects with the expenditure or appropriation changes typically are considered for the amendments in the CIP. The Board of Education's request FY23 capital budget and the FY23 through 2028 CIP totaled $1.767 billion, an increase of $148.3 million more than the previously approved CIP. The County Council adopted FY23 through 28 CIP for Montgomery County Public Schools, totaling $1.771 billion for the 6-year period, an increase of $4 million more than the board's request. While the County Council did approve an increase, the year-by-year expenditures significantly were reduced in the first 3 years, and we've shared that with the board a number of times in terms of how that change in the expenditures in the first 3 years have really impacted us in a significant way. And with that, additional expenditures were approved in the last 3 years of the CIP, but as you know, we map it out in terms of what we want to accomplish over the 6 years, so anything shifting in funding over that period allows us to then have to look at shifts that we have to make in the projects. So, as a result, the adopted CIP included completion delays for 8 capital projects and expenditure reductions for various countywide systemic projects. And let's talk a little bit about why the CIP and overall was really important. So we know through the years of 2007, 2008, we've had since then really significant enrollment in Montgomery County Public Schools. It's so interesting. I think about our staff and how they have to really be on top of the projections, and how, quite frankly, in Montgomery County it's been really difficult because our growth has over time just been extremely rapid. Of course, when COVID-19 happened, we saw a shift and a decrease in our enrollment. But with that said, although we had a decrease in our enrollment over the past 2 years, our enrollment has gone up, and so the preliminary September 30th, 2022 number, which I call out that date because that is when we report to the state what our enrollment is, so that they can use that to forecast funding for the following year. Enrollment is at 161,102 students. So now we've returned to pre-pandemic projections. And why is that important? It's important because if we're now in a very different place than we've been for the past 2 years, we can anticipate and should expect that our enrollment growth is going to continue to get back to the type of enrollment we had prior to the pandemic. Why is that important in this process today? Because we have to take that into consideration when we're thinking about the capacity of our schools, the schools in terms of thinking about the current enrollment, what we expect the enrollment to be in all of those different scenarios. So our total school system enrollment is projected to increase to 167,278 students by the 28-29 school year. Of course, that's some out years, but we have to plan for what those needs are right now. This projection represents a slight slowdown in enrollment growth, in part due to the health pandemic, as well as decline in residence birth. So it's growth, but not as rapid as what we had been expecting or experiencing in the earlier 2000s. We believe, in light of the projected enrollment growth, even with the slight slowdown, the capital projects included in the adopted CIP are warranted and, most importantly, must remain on schedule. FY 2024 is an amendment year, and therefore it is a standard practice to recommend limited amendments. Unfortunately, because of the effects of the health pandemic, of course, we've shared this with you before, there have been rise in material costs. Labor needs have been significant in ways that we've had to work with many of our contractors in very different ways over time to be able to continue the work. The supply chain shortages, we know that has been an issue that has also contributed to a lot of the timeline updates that we've had to make, and of course, just overall things that we had to consider in the impact of the CIP very differently than we've ever had to before. So as a result of that, in order to maintain the completion dates of previously approved projects and to address our aging infrastructure, it is necessary to increase the adopted budgets for several of our individual capital projects and countywide systemic projects. Okay? So it's no different from building a house right now. Anyone who started to build the house before the pandemic or any type of infrastructure, it probably, in some cases, almost doubled in terms of the cost. I remember us having a conversation before and speaking of, you will not go around Montgomery County and just see a school that started and expect that it remains as a school that started and doesn't finish, and it stands there unfinished for years. No, we want to make sure we fulfill the commitment to our community. And even with all of these costs that we did not anticipate would happen in this way as a result of the pandemic, we did need to address that to make sure that we could stay on schedule. So therefore, I recommend an amended CIP which totals $1.921 billion, an increase of $151.3 million more than the previously approved CIP. And it includes the following: funding for 7 capital projects to address construction cost increases and maintain the completion dates for these previously approved projects. And that's the majority of the recommendation. Funding to convert an approved addition project to a replacement project on a new site. Funding to address local and state initiatives, including the Blueprint for Maryland's Future and Safe School Drinking Water Act. Funding to increase various countywide projects as a result of increased construction costs. In addition to the CIP recommendations, we are also going to present to you my recommendation for the Clarksburg Elementary School Number 9 Boundary Study. Today, our presentation is overall going to focus on, 1, enrollment forecasts. We're also going to provide an overview of my recommendation for the CIP, generally, and review of the boundary study recommendations. As you know, before, we talked about being able to bring those recommendations back and to take them into consideration when we talk about these different scenarios that we need to make some decisions on, or I make recommendations on. So we look forward to working with you during the coming weeks to prepare for the final request by the Board of Education to be reviewed by the County Council and County Executive. So we will go ahead with no further ado and start our presentation. And at this time, I will turn it over to you, Mr. Adams.
Well, thank you, Dr. McKnight, and thank you, members of the Board of Education. So we're very excited here to walk through Dr. McKnight's recommendation. As we've talked over the course of the past year or so, just outlining and mapping out the inflationary pressures as well as supply chain that still impacts us as a school district, and really impacts all that are constructing, across the United States and most likely across the globe. So as we talk about this, we are obviously meshing in the pressures, as Dr. McKnight said, about the enrollment growth that we've had in the past, as well as what we're starting to again experience. Much of what we've seen over the past couple of years has been at the secondary level. So what you'll see in Dr. McKnight's recommendation is really, a strong push to maintain the completion dates of those secondary schools. Obviously, we have 2 new high schools within our CIP, which we will talk about tomorrow in a little bit greater detail. But those 2 projects plus 2 others are significant in terms of relieving a majority of our high schools across the district. So as we talk about this, as we get into the next few slides on enrollment, we will be mapping out and talking through the importance of these projects and why the funding of these inflationary pressures is going to be critical for the school district. The other aspect of the CIP that we are going to talk about is we are in I would say, a very unique stage of the county. This is probably the first ever for us as a school district, and I think this is probably the first ever for many of the LEAs across the state. Right, there's been an influx of state funds through Built to Learn, which has been a huge benefit to us. But at the same time, these inflationary pressures and some of the declining revenues in the county are creating a bit of a crossroads situation. And as we map out over this presentation, we will start to show you what these funding sources look like, what the assumptions have been made in the past, and what we really need to see moving forward from a county perspective to be able to take advantage of our state aid and state funds. So again, a lot of these convergent, complex, situations, particularly around funding, are going to be very impactful, and one that we will have to pay close attention to over the course of this winter and obviously into next spring with the county council. But as Dr. McKnight said, as a biannual CIP, this CIP is really focused on maintaining and obviously looking at the programs that are coming out of the state initiatives around Blueprint, other enrollment pressures, and really just making sure that we are well positioned to work through the next couple of years from a planning and a student both programmatic but space needs perspective. So we'll talk about that in much greater detail as we get forward. So I think at this time it probably makes sense just to pull up the slides and have Ms. Karamijas start to go through some of the specifics around our demographic data.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. So we are going to start. You can move to the next slide, please. We'll talk about the agenda today, which is we are going to be looking at the 2022-2023 preliminary September 30th enrollment, as well as the enrollment projections for the 6 years. We are going to go through at a little bit of a higher level today, the superintendent's recommended amendments. Tomorrow, we will get in more greater detail for each of those amendments. And then we will spend a little bit more time talking about Supplement A, which is the recommendation for Clarksburg Elementary School number 9. As Ms. Wolf indicated in her introduction, we will go through that presentation, but board members we can talk about whether or not any alternatives need to be or want to be considered before that first public hearing, which is November 3rd. Next slide, please. So this is the schedule for the CIP. Today, October 31st, is the presentation. Tomorrow, there is another work session. And then November 3rd and November 9th are those 2 public hearings. Then the 10th is a work session. Then the 14th is the final public hearing, unless another public hearing needs to be held, which is the November 15th date, and then November 17th will be action by the Board of Education. So that is the schedule moving forward. Next slide, please. So when we talk about enrollment, as Dr. McKnight indicated, we have had an increase in enrollment since the 2007-2008 school year. Of course, COVID hit, and we did have a decline in enrollment for 2 years. And again, our preliminary September 30th enrollment is 161,102, which is an increase of 2,870 students for this current year. Next slide, please. Again, total system enrollment, we are projecting in the last year of the CIP, 28-29 school year, that there will be an increase, total enrollment will increase to 167,238. That is a slight slowdown than we have seen in previous CIP years. One of the reasons is, of course, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it's also because of a continued decline in residential births, which of course then leads to lower kindergarten enrollment, which then goes through the 12 grades, which of course then will have a whole system impact. But it is just a slight decrease than what we have seen in the past, and so even with the slowdown, the slight slowdown, we do believe that the recommended CIP and the projects that were even included in the adopted CIP need to remain on schedule. Next slide, please. So this is a chart we have presented over the years. It is the first column is the grades, so grades K through 12, including pre-K and pre-K special ed. The second column is the official 2021-22 school year, so that was last year's official enrollment. And if you look at the very last row, you could see that that was 158,232. The preliminary September 30th enrollment, as we've said, is 161,102, so that's that increase of 2,870. If you look at that column, the purple column where it says 1 year change, you could see where there were increases and decreases per grade level. So for example, the first one, and actually I probably need my glasses. The first column, the first row, you can see it was an increase of a decrease of 180 students. That's how you read it from the official to the preliminary September 30th. So that's that column. And again, with that official one, or that preliminary 1 year change of 2,870. The last column that we show, and we've been showing this for a couple of years, is what that growth decline is from grade to grade. So you can see from kindergarten to first, the increase of 651 students. From first to second, you can see that increase of 365 students, again, on and on. The big jump, and we see this all the time, from 8th to 9th grade, you see that increase of about 2,900 students. That could be kids coming from privates entering high school. It could be some students that remain in high school to 9th grade till they get the credits that they need to then go off to 10th grade. So that's how you read that last column.
And I would just say one thing about the projections, and this is really important. So our work from a planning office works from the official September 30th data and then projects out. There is expectations that growth occurs throughout the school year. So when we talk about the boundary later, we talk about some of the other projection elements. These are the sort of the official dates or the official numbers that we work with, and these numbers then translate into future projections, into future massaging of where we see student enrollment going in the future. And I would say from last year and through the pandemic to where we are, our demographer has been spot on with these numbers, working from this official September 30th numbers throughout year to year. So for the schools that may see bigger increases throughout the school year, yes, that's expected. But I just wanted to clarify that these are the numbers that we work from a planning perspective when we map out the 6-year projections. So it's not what you would expect to see at an individual school 6 months from now, right? The numbers do change. These are just that sort of line in the sand of where we start from.
Seth, thank you. Can you, if this is the wrong time to ask the question or you're going to be addressing it, just say so, but I'm really happy to hear you say that the projections have been really precise. But we hear, I think I can speak for other members of the board, that we hear all the time that there's underestimates of enrollment, and I think specifically at schools where they're told that there's going to be a certain number of students the next year and it's off by 200 or 300. Can you either speak quickly to that or just let me know if that's going to be something you're going to be talking about later?
Well, some schools do experience a few anomalies. It's not many. Last year, we had one or two schools that had more students that were enrolling into that school throughout the school year than what was expected or trended from previous years. There was no development that really contributed to it. There was no really major event in that community. We work with our planning office to really sort of make sure we understand what's happening in a community to be able to forecast. There are some cases where more turnover happens sort of unexpectedly, and that creates more enrollment at a school than what we typically would forecast or expect to see. But those are very few anomalies. And the point around enrollment projections is when you see these anomalies, and this is the work that happened several years ago, that information is taken to then start to predict what happens in future years, right? So projections are exactly that. They're projections, right? If you knew exactly what was going to happen in 6 years, we probably wouldn't be sitting here. But so we work with that information. It's sort of an evolutionary process. It's a trend process from individual communities, and that influences the work moving forward. So those schools that you saw last year that had an influx, most likely, and you will see in the projections that we've adapted, we've modified. But we don't just throw numbers at it, right? It's trying to predict and make sure we're thinking this through, because there are serious implications if we are either way over or way under from a planning perspective.
Can I just ask one quick question? Why is it preliminary data from September when it's passed, and shouldn't it be exact?
So preliminary September 30th comes out. Remember, we do this because we start projections and have the book released or go to publication by mid-October. The official September 30th numbers actually don't come out until November. And so the master plan, and actually in the board's release of their book, I do put in the official September 30th because then they are available, and the master plan also reflects the official September 30th. So it's just about timing that the preliminary September 30th number comes out the 1st of October, but the completed, maybe getting, making sure all the numbers are exactly, and as Dr. McKnight said, what we send to the state are those preliminary September 30th numbers. And they don't really fluctuate much between the preliminary September 30th and the actual. There could be a couple of students here or there, but it really does not change much. So next slide. So this is, we show this slide as well. This is a 10-year, I think we have 10 years in here showing that we can see. We've talked about prior to the pandemic, we were growing about 2,500 students a year. And then you can see those two decline years, last year and the year before. But we are back up, as again indicated, 2,870, which actually is higher than what the average had been, which is about 2,500 students over each year. So that is a little bit of an increase than what we had seen prior to the pandemic. Next slide. Again, I talked about this just a little at the first slide about the births. This is a slide that shows what we assume to come into our kindergarten based upon the births. So you can see I showed that the arrow in 2017, there were 12,624 births. And from that, in this school year, the preliminary September 30th is showing 10,670 kindergartners. We do not capture all the kindergartners, of course. They go to private schools, may wind up moving out of the county. And so I think it's about, and it shows actually an 84% capture rate. So you can see that so as you see the bursts declining from 2011, we were at 13,000, and then they slowly are coming down. The assumption is that they will continue to go down just a little bit over the years before they then return and start increasing the bursts. But right now, that's where we are. And so that is why, again, the enrollment projection is slowing down just a bit because of that slight decline and continued slight decline in kindergarten, in births. Next slide, please. So again, just another way to look at this, over the years, we have seen since 2013 about 10,000, an increase in about 10,000 students, 9,813. You can see where we hit that peak in 2019 of 165, then of course the pandemic, and now we're slowly climbing back up. Next slide. And this is that same slide, only showing it by grade level. So the blue line indicates grades K through 5, the orange line 6 through 8, and the gray line is high school. So again, you could see what the actual is, and it's 68,320 for K through 5. For the middle school, 35,972 students this school year, and then for high school, 52,316 students for that preliminary September 30th total. And then you can see the last year, that's the 2008-2009 projected breakdown of students by grade. Next slide. So this slide shows our enrollment by race and ethnicity. Again, you can see each of the lines represent. So for example, the blue line represents our Hispanic students and the growth that we have seen in that student population. Then the next line, I think it's black, is our white non-Hispanic students. And we have talked about this, and you can actually see the cross where we have seen a decline in the white non-Hispanic students. The green line indicates our African-American students. The next line, the brown, our Asian students. And then remember back in, I think it was 2010, we started showing 2 or more races. And so a little of our race and ethnic changes occurred there with students identifying 2 or more races. And so again, that is our breakdown of the preliminary September 30th numbers. Next slide. And this is just another way to look at that. It's just a different graph. And you can see, though, this one it goes further back in the past, back from 1970 is when this chart starts. So you can see sort of the change over time, about 50 years, 52 years, and where we are today. And I think that was the last slide. If there are any other questions? No?
I have one.
Scott, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. Again, this may be premature, so just say so if it is, but, you know, with the possible passage of Thrive, the likely passage of Thrive 2 2050, we're talking about likely higher density population, certainly in some parts of the county. I assume this takes that into account as well.
Well, so yes and no, but more on the no end of it, because our work really evolves around approved development.
Okay.
So we can think about forecasting, but the reality is unless it's approved by the planning board as an official development or a change in density or something different, then those numbers aren't included in some of our projections. But it is something that we're looking at exactly from what you standpoint is the possible implications of what that means as a school district and what it could mean to, you know, specific school communities, clusters, or even just regions, and how that overall plan could be implemented in the future.
Lynn, I think I saw your light next, and then Carla.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question if we're looking at slide 7. And I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that if we look at that aberrant dip in 2018-19 enrollment, and then the bump back up in 2019-20 that reflected the changes in immigration, newcomer status related to kind of the actions of the last administration. And I'm just wondering how, as we see, our newcomer numbers coming in, and we know that those numbers, students tend to enroll throughout the school year and not just in a nice, neat bundle at, in August and September before the start of the school year. How are we accounting for those numbers? Because I think the experts are really telling us that a lot of that migration is not really so much what we traditionally thought of as folks seeking asylum because of conflict, but it's related to the ongoing climate crisis and changes related to that, making folks migrate more because of economic issues. So how are we addressing those things in these projections?
So from a projection standpoint, we're just purely looking at it from projections. But when we start to get further into the CIP and the superintendent's recommendation, you're going to start to see an increase in relocatable classrooms, different ways to navigate, sort of this throughout the year influx of students. Obviously, we are mapping schools, we're tracking schools that are sort of on the cusp of needing additional classrooms. Those are the ones that we're already starting to plan for. But sort of this change in mid-year or throughout the year enrollment is one that we've been following, and one that Dr. McKnight has sort of challenged us to think differently about our programs too, and are they more fluid throughout the year versus sort of just this summer month type of placement process. But that's one of those areas we'll dive in a bit further tomorrow, but exactly for the reason that you just mentioned.
Can I just follow up on Lynn's question before Carla starts? So am I understanding this correctly? So I know down in Bethesda, the hotel has been holding a number of kids that came from Afghanistan, let's say. So do we have a particular school we're trying to send them to? I mean, because a lot of the Bethesda schools were overcrowded. How does that exactly work?
Yes, so I'll address that, Ms. Wolf. So as we have students coming in to us for different circumstances, we take a number of things into consideration. One, where the family is at that time that they enrolled a child, and then also taking into consideration the government agencies that they're working with, so that if they are going to be moved, we're causing less transition as possible. We don't have a particular school per se that we, send them to, but we try to take the circumstances into consideration of how we're collectively working with the county to help settle them, to place them appropriately.
Thanks, because I was just worried about overcrowding at any one school
Of course.
as a result of that. So, Carla.
Related to the newcomers, just another slide 9, when you have the data by grade level, the impact of newcomers in 9th grade, right? Because they're all placed in 9th grade until they figure out the credits. And I know we had 1,000 newcomers in the month of September alone. That's a big factor in our enrollment numbers. I think we need to call that out. And of course, they go to schools all over the county, but certain schools are traditionally more affected than others.
And that's a great point, and I think that slide was really telling, particularly from Dr. McKnight's recommendation. At the elementary school level and at the middle school level, you see those lines sort of a bit flat. At the high school level, it's still increasing. And where the majority of our capital improvement projects are at that secondary level, at the high school level, either creating new high schools or adding additional capacity. So that is a number that we are obviously very concerned with, and I do believe from a perspective of importance, from a funding standpoint, allowing and providing the capacity at that secondary level is going to be the highest, one of the highest priorities from just a capacity standpoint perspective. Because it's not just today, it's also something that we're going to continue to see to grow in the future as well.
I'm not seeing any other lights, so you want to continue?
Okay. So if you could bring back up the slides. Now we're just going to go through sort of the highlights of the superintendent's recommendations for the amendments. Next slide, please. So just a little background information. The Board of Education's requested 23 capital budget and 23 to 28 CIP totaled $1.767 billion, which was an increase of $148.3 million over the previously adopted CIP. The County Council this past May approved a CIP for MCPS, which totaled $1.771 billion for the 6-year period, which actually was an increase of $4 million over the board's request. And while that was an increase, the year-by-year expenditures were significantly reduced in the early years, with additional expenditures placed in the final 3 years of the CIP. And that resulted shortfall in the first 3 years, resulted in a number of delays. So we had 1 year delay for 4 projects, which were 3 high schools and 1 middle school. There were 2 year delays for 4 projects, which were 2 high schools and 2 elementary schools. And then we did have expenditure reductions for various countywide systemic projects, including HVAC and PLAR, and I believe Rufus as well. Next slide, please. So this is what it looked like from a number standpoint. You could see on the top row is the Board of Education's request, then the county executive's recommendation. The county council's recommendation actually was $55 million higher than the board's request, but it did go, that additional funding went into 2 placeholder projects that related to our new state aid, the Build to Learn, to try to maximize our state aid. At the end, the county council's adopted CIP is that next line, which is that $1.769 billion. Compared to the board's request, and you can see in 23, 24, and 25 those reductions in expenditures, almost $48 million in 23. In 24, it was $93 million, and in 25, it was $44 million. So as a result of those shortfalls, again, we had to delay projects in order to shift those projects from the early years into the out years. Next slide, please. So we did talk a little bit, Seth referred to revenues, and we thought that this was important because we do have had a huge increase in our state aid as a result of the Build to Learn. And as a result of that, there were some changes in the assumptions of funding sources. So on the left is the adopted 21 to 26 amended CIP. And you can see, for example, what the assumptions were, or actually what the assumptions were and what the actuals were for that 6-year CIP. For example, our largest funding source is always general obligation bonds, and you can see in that slide, it's about $556 million for the 6 years. It's about 34%. State aid is about 28% at $448 million. And then you have the remaining, which is our recordation tax, our impact tax, and current revenue. And current revenue is relatively small. The difference between those 2 taxes, or just to explain those 2 taxes, the recordation tax is the tax that we receive as a result of sales of homes in the county. The impact tax is a result of the tax that we receive as a result of new development in the county. The recordation tax is actually shared between us and Montgomery College, and the impact tax comes directly to us. It is a school impact tax directly to us. On the right, you can see what was adopted this past May as part of the 23 to 28 CIP. The increase of state aid, you can see, is reflected there. It's at $551 million, which is about 31% of our budget. And the big difference that you could see in these graphs is the general obligation bonds. So because of the assumption, the increased assumption in state aid, as well as recordation tax, there is a lowering percentage that the MCPS received in that 6-year period for general obligation bonds. So you can see it's a comparison between $349 million, which was just approved this past May, as opposed to $556 million, which was approved the year before. The other big difference, and you could see for impact tax and current revenue, they stayed relatively the same, but there is an increase in an assumption of recordation tax. So it is, what's in the approved is $581 million. What was in the adopted the year before was only $393 million. So that is an increase, and I think part of that was due to the record sales that the county was having. The question is whether or not that will hold in order to gain or to get that recordation tax as part of our 6 years.
And this slide could be one of the most important slides as we think about the affordability of the Montgomery County Public Schools Capital Improvements Program. One of the things that we are obviously paying very close attention to is that historically, the funding share was sort of what you see on the left side from the 21 to 26. The change in some of the policies and revisions at the planning office, as well as our state aid, has translated into what you see on the right, which is the adopted 23 to 28 CIP. Why that's important is because over the course of our full CIP, those same assumptions are there. Those same assumptions of a recordation tax of being as high as it is, as well as equally important, the lower GO bond percentage is what is assumed for our revenue share throughout the county over the course of our entire 6-year CIP. Our concern from a staff level, which we've obviously shared with the Office of Management and Budget at the county level, as well as the planning office, is from a GO bond perspective, a lot of the offset in those bonds has gone to other projects in the county. We were historically at $556 million, the largest bond share in the county. Based on the 349, we're now the third highest, and the highest is now the Department of Transportation. And those Department of Transportation projects obviously are just as long, if not longer, than our projects, and they have accounted for those shares over the next 6 years. So the concern for us obviously is if recordation tax decreases, what does that mean from an overall funding source perspective for the school system? And if the state aid is there, we have to also be reminded that state aid comes at a share of 50-50 match, meaning 50% has to come from the local, which would be recordation impact, revenue, GO bonds, and 50 from the state. So if you don't have that 50% from the local, you can't take advantage of that full state percentage. So again, this is probably maybe oversimplifying and getting a little maybe too in the weeds on this one, but this is for us one of the most important slides for this particular CIP as we see this process carry out over the next 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, so just kind of a clarifying question. So as the county does its quadrennial review, we used to call it subdivision staging policy. I think now we call it county growth policy review, where we're looking countywide at development and impacts. Mostly pressures on infrastructure, roads, and schools. And we've had several traditional ways that we've tried to ensure that the development pays for itself, which we know it never does. But there were some changes made in the user fees, the impact taxes, the recordation taxes. And I thought that we were seeing that math wasn't working out the way it had been anticipated when the last changes were made. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So we are working with the planning office. That would be out of the planning department at the county level. We have asked for that information because I think there's been a lot of conversation around what has sort of worked out, what hasn't from an assumption standpoint. I think the challenge obviously is that within that implementation period, we did have the COVID-19 pandemic, so some assumptions may not have held. As development definitely went through some challenges through that pandemic. But as we're seeing, development continue towards the tail end of the pandemic and to where we are today, we are asking for that information from the planning office to just better understand and to help us prepare for the future too. Because if there is less funding source, a lot of these pieces all come together between our state aid request as well as what we may see from the local level. And obviously is very important from a prioritization standpoint when we're trying to map out the CIP process. But I do know, Ms. Saris, we are scheduled to talk at Monday's fiscal management to go in a little bit deeper, a much deeper dive into state aid, making sure everyone understands how state aid works, how that works in conjunction with local aid. But that is going to be something that, once we get that information from the planning office, we will bring back to both fiscal management and the board as a whole, so everyone sees what those assumptions either are, or if they've come to fruition or they have not.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we want to make sure we keep our eyes on. I think we have 2 more years to go until the next review, and just being really sort of intentional and objective about what those changes have actually meant for funding for schools, which are, essential infrastructure in the county. So, especially as we continue to grow.
Ms. Silvestri, did I see your light?
I just wanted to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying, since you said this is one of the most important slides of the day. So you're saying that should home sales not stay at this steady rate and generate a higher amount of income, we are concerned that the GO bonds decreased and now are tied up in long-term transportation projects, which will not be available should the recordation tax not keep up at this rate. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you, I understand.
Am I seeing any other lights?
So
Dr.
I
Johnson?
guess I would just ask, in the short term, is there anything that we as a board could be doing to help with this advocacy? Or is it kind of wait and see what's happening? I want to get ahead of this if we can, obviously.
No, and that's a great question. I think as a non-funding body, it's sometimes difficult to I guess influence this process, right? I think the most important advocacy will come out of your request to the county executive following this process, and then obviously outlining the importance of our projects and why full funding and the timelines are important. It's always good to point out to the constituency the facts on the ground, particularly from a funding standpoint. But I think your advocacy definitely will come into play from your request following this process.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other lights. You want to continue?
Next slide, please. So general obligation bonds come from the spending affordability guidelines that the county council sets. In October of 2021, they did set the spending affordability guidelines for the 23 to 28 CIP. And on the right, on the chart, you can see what that number was. It was $1.68 billion for the 6-year period. That adopted SAG reduced general obligation bonds for the 6 years by $90 million. If you look at that, again, that chart, starting in 2013 through 18 CIP, we started at $1.77 billion. We got up as high as $2.04 billion for the 6 years, which was in the 17 to 22, and the amended, they kept it at that $2.04 billion. And then after that, you can now see the decline. We went down to $1.86 billion to $1.77, and now we are at $1.68 billion. Because it is an amendment year, they do not approve SAG in October, but they come back in February to determine whether or not they want to maintain the SAG, which they can do. They have 2 choices. They can raise the SAG, the limit of SAG by a maximum of 10%, or they can lower it by any amount, or they can keep it exactly the way it is. So those are sort of the 3 choices that they have. And they usually do that, I believe, by the 2nd week of February. So we won't know until February whether or not they will increase or decrease SAG. Of course, increasing the SAG, again, relates to the general obligation bonds, which means that they would have then more bonds that they could then put to other, whether it's county government, MCPS. If they lower the SAG, as that chart, the previous chart indicated, that would have an impact on our 6-year total because those bonds that were assumed in May would be lowered. Next slide. So again, this is an amendment year. 2024 is an amendment year, and it is typical that there are limited amendments when we go through this process. However, the effects of COVID-19 still continue to impact our CIP, unprecedented rise in material prices, disruptions in the supply chain, staffing shortages, things that we have talked about many times. In order to maintain the completion dates of our previously approved projects, it was necessary to increase the adopted budgets for several of our capital projects. Also, additional funding was required to address our aging infrastructure as cost increases impacted those projects as well, for example, HVAC and roof projects. Next slide, please. So going right into the superintendent's recommendation, the total is 1.921 billion over the 6 years, but the remaining 5 years of the CIP, which is an increase of 151.3 million more than the previously approved CIP. The recommendations include the following, and there is no order to them. We just put them, I did them in the capital projects first, and then I went to the county-wides and basically in alphabetical order. So you could see that there's a $91 million increase for 7 capital projects, and you can see those projects listed. Greencastle Elementary School, Joanne Leelick Elementary School at Broad Acres, Silver Spring International Middle School Addition. We have Crown High School, Northwood High School, Poolsville High School, and the new Charles W. Woodward High School. All of those were increased in order to keep them on their approved completion schedule. Next slide, please. There was an increase to the Burtonsville Elementary School project. The approved project was in addition to Burtonsville Elementary School. The recommendation is to increase that project by $29.87 million to change from an addition at their current site, instead to construct a new Burtonsville Elementary School at another location. So that's an increase of about $30 million. The next amendment is $10 million to provide funding for our Building Modifications and Program Improvement Project, our BIMPI project, as we usually refer to it. That increase is to implement the new blueprint for Maryland's future, to modify existing facility to provide inclusive restrooms for our students at many of our schools throughout the county, and to modify existing facilities due to special education program changes and relocations. The next amendment is $10 million as well to address our backlog of our heating, ventilation, and air conditioning projects that were further impacted due to construction cost increases. So without that additional funding, we will fall even further behind in our backlog. The next one is $2.5 million to begin the design for the relocation of the materials management building. We did have $2.5 million in the 2023 to 28 CIP request during reconciliation and finally at the County Council approved CIP. That was taken out of the adopted CIP, so it is being put back into this CIP recommendation. Next slide.
Can you just talk a little bit about 2.5 million being for design cost? That seems high to design it, I mean.
Yeah, so we looked at this as twofold, right? So we look at it from a perspective of doing site selection, but also then there's an element of feasibility and then ultimately design. But if you think about all those pieces put together, where we were before was probably, I think it was close to 25 million as a total. So 10% for the site selection process for feasibility and exploration, and then design is what we're asking for.
I just wanted to confirm that it was all part of that and it wasn't just for the design. And then I had one other question about that slide. The Burtonsville Elementary School, I appreciate the recommendation for the additional monies to make it, to me, makes much more sense to build a new school than to just do an addition when they're roughly, so close in cost. But just the delivery date, I know that that's been a big concern for the Burtonsville community, and making sure that a new building's not going to delay their project as opposed to an addition. Can you just speak to whether?
Yeah, so we will spend, I think, considerable amount of time on Burtonsville
Okay.
tomorrow, but what I would say is that from a new school, from an addition to a new school, it does add a little bit of scope to it. So just from a duration standpoint, we still would have to go through, ultimately, even though we have a dedicated site, a site selection process, and then into the design and construction. So we are looking at this as being the reasonable amount of time to go through the process of constructing a new school.
So how much extra time is it going to take, a year, you think?
So from an addition standpoint, the earliest it could open is 2026. In this recommendation, it's 2027. So we're saying it would be a year longer for a new school.
If it gets funded.
That's right. If it gets funded, and I just want to add, we have committed to spending the time to talk with our Burtonsville community. We've already started that process to continue, because one of the things that we recognized and learned that was very important in future consideration is we understood the disappointment over time of not getting their interest into the budget. But we also now know that it's going to be important for us to continue to communicate with them on a regular basis, to keep them involved in the process as we go through, so that they are aware of any updates, they are aware of where we are in the funding process, so that they can know, understand, and then respond and react in appropriate ways throughout the process to ensure that, our value is put forward in making sure that we address this.
Well, hopefully they'll come out and support the advocacy of the funding then for that.
Have we started our discussions with them about a new building as opposed to an addition or renovation?
So not into the level of detail that we are planning to do. One of the things that was a slight disappointment in the last CIP was that while money was added for design, it was really just 1 year of a 3-year design, so it's not really enough of a funding standpoint to do a full design. But one of the things that we also heard from the community was to make sure we knew or had plans or had a vision for the existing building if we were going to transition to a recommendation of a new school. So I think we're very close to being able to have some very robust about the vision for the existing building, particularly I think when we do talk about blueprint for Maryland's future, some of the other critical needs in the eastern part of the county. What we also know is that we are limited in space on the east part of the county. So any building that we own from an MCPS standpoint to be able to put to use, to whether it be pre-K or other programmatic functions, is going to become very, very important moving forward. So I think we're very close to being able to go out and have some of those really robust conversations about possible what a new school would look like, but also what we would envision for the existing building and how we would program from an academic standpoint.
Thank you. Ms. Harris?
Yeah, and I do want to thank Dr. McKnight and my colleagues for raising the concerns around Burtonsville. Because I know last year at this time, when the first mention came out about maybe we should take advantage of multiple factors to think about just building a brand-new school instead of the addition onto the existing Burtonsville ES. And for a lot of reasons, that fell somewhat flat with the community. And I appreciated in April last year, Mr. Adams and Ms. Dawson and I went and met with the community, did a lot of listening, not that much talking. But I think I just want to commend, I think particularly Mr. Adams did a really good job of really acknowledging the long-term history and the concerns of the community and assuring them that this was going to be a much more robust two-way communication moving forward, and really making sure that we were looking openly with the community at all options, and that the community would really be part of all those conversations. And that even if the decision was made to build a new school versus just an addition, that there would not be a significant delay, which I think was one of their main concerns as well. So, but thank you for all of that.
I just want to add in there, and I know that you have talked about this in the past, and so I'm aware you do it, but for public's record and information, you talk about programming, and that is something that we will look at as a county, I would assume, in terms of what type of programs you might want to incorporate over there, to bring some things to the East County. And so, that's part of the consideration in the building, correct?
Yeah, I really want to thank you for the work you're doing over in Burtonsville, and remind us that the blueprint does call for public-private partnerships and increases in pre-K. So I want to think about that as a possible use if it comes up for the old Burtonsville building in addition. Thank you. Do I see any more lights? I do have a question, and maybe it's something I'm not quite understanding, so you may have more information on this. I was in the legislative session of MABE, and when we go to the state to talk about our capital improvements, do we go or do we go and the county goes with us? How does that work?
So the state process has changed dramatically over the years as well. If many may recall a time where we would go as a school district and present in front of the Board of Public Works. That changed. The Board of Public Works is no longer that body where you go and present from a state aid standpoint. It is through the IEC, the Interagency Commission on School Construction. And that's been maybe a little less formal than the Board of Public Work processes. But one of the things that we are going to talk about next Monday, but from a state aid standpoint, is really key to understanding is that we are unable to make a request for state aid until there is a commitment from the local level to fund it. So our state aid request this fall is based on last spring's approval of our budget by county council. And then obviously any changes, modifications that would occur through this amended capital budget year would then follow next fall's state aid request. So unfortunately, from a state aid standpoint, there does need to be that commitment from the local level before we can go and start to ask for additional aid from the state.
And that was my understanding, because what they said, if I understood them correctly, is that our interests have to be confirmed by the county council, that they have the final say over this and can make changes. Am I understanding that correctly?
Oh, that is absolutely
Yes.
correct. And that support comes through the approval of the
Right.
CIP.
Okay.
And that is through that reconciliation process that Adrian recommended. And that's what is reflected in the master plan, is what the county council approved last spring as part of our CIP.
I
So
just
you are
wanted to
correct.
make sure that everyone understood that. Thank you.
And we also do a joint state aid letter that goes every year. It is signed by the board president, it is signed by the county executive, and it is signed by the county council. And in it, it does say what the request was, and it is an affirmation that all three bodies support what that request is. Okay. So the next slide, on this side, I'm sorry, can you go back? Thank you. So the next amendment that we have is $2.5 million to provide funding for our relocatable classroom project as a result of the increases in construction costs, as well as to implement the new blueprint for Maryland's future. So we have sort of two projects. We have our BIMPI project that does include some of that need, because we do have schools that can, if we're looking at additional pre-K classrooms, can be accommodated within the school because there is capacity at the school, but modifications would have to be made, which is why we have some money in our BIMPI project. But if there's schools that are overutilized that cannot accommodate those additional classes, we also need them for relocatable classrooms. So that's why the additional money in both. The next amendment is $2.5 million. Thank you. To provide funding for the school security project to update electronic access to our buildings, as well as install new and or upgrade security technology at many of our schools throughout the county. So that's an increase to our school security project. The next one is $2.9 million to provide funding for our stormwater discharge and water quality management project to upgrade and replace water fixtures throughout the school system to comply with the Safe Schools Drinking Water Act legislation. Next slide. So we wanted to just provide, again, from a numbers perspective, the approved versus the recommended. So again, the top line is the approved CIP, that $1.767 billion. The total recommended CIP is $1.921 billion. So again, it's an increase of 151 point, almost 3 million over the 6 years. And you can see where those increases are. So FY23, again, remained as is. We're already in FY23. 24, 25, 26, and 27 did increase, and you could see where those increases are. For 24, it's about $54 million. For FY25, it's about $44 million. For FY26, about $36 million. And for FY27, about $21 million. And in FY28, you could see that decrease of about $3.3 million. Again, to get to that $151 million increase over the 6 years. We also have, and we usually don't show the appropriation as much as the expenditure years, but you can see there is a very pretty significant increase in the appropriation for FY24, and that is mainly due to all of our high school projects. So we have money for Crown High School, we have money for Damascus High School, we have money for Poolsville High School, we have money for Woodward High School. And those construction dollars are pretty significant. And again, the appropriation is always higher than the expenditure in that year because we have to award the contract and need to have those appropriations approved to award those contracts.
So just to clarify, if these increases were approved, that does not move the high school projects like Crown and Woodward back up a year?
No, there is no, in the recommendations, there is no acceleration. It is to maintain their approved completion dates. This is about increases in funding due to the construction cost increases that we're experiencing.
And you know, so, and we will talk about this a bit more tomorrow, but the reason that the funding increases for inflation is so important is that these projects are planning to go to bid later this spring. So even from an acceleration, we're well beyond accelerating at this point. But we're just planning on maintaining the schedule and obviously working within those inflationary pressures. But I will go through the really fine level schedule details tomorrow.
Okay, next slide. And that's it for the CIP.
I think you can continue. We were asking questions as you were going along.
That's fine.
Oh, wait a minute, Arvin, go ahead.
I have a question about the 10 million for the BIMPI funding and the HVAC projects. So is that combined 20 million enough to address meeting blueprint requirements, adding inclusive restrooms and all the HVAC needs in all of our facilities?
So both the 10 million in both BIMPI and HVAC are in addition to the expenditure that we already have approved.
Okay.
So for FY24, there's already $20 million in the CIP. So that would up it to $30 million. And I think BIMPI is, I think it's 18. Oh, I can't see what's in the approved.
But to also answer your question, no, not in full. I mean,
Yeah.
but we look at these as you know, being able to do this work on an annual basis and make steady progression to adding. So the idea with this is that this would be an increase, but it's something that we will continue to revisit future years at higher funding levels to be able to obviously go through and systematically add throughout time.
So to clarify, the addition, it's the same facilities, but in the same vein, just to maintain the timeline, the reason for the addition, for the 10 million for each of them?
For which project?
So for the 10 million increase in both the BIMPI and the HVAC, the reason for the increase is in the same vein of maintaining the original timeline for the same facilities?
No, so the CIP is broken down in individual projects, whether it be an
Right.
addition at a school. Those are our countywide projects, so the BIMPI,
Okay.
the HVAC. So the increases really for around whether it be an inclusive restroom, some of our blueprint work, some of our special education relocation, is addressing schools throughout the district. It's not money, I mean, if you were to say, what is the cost to add 3 inclusive restrooms to all 210 schools, there's no way it would fit in this. But sort of the idea is that these county-wides allow us to make steady progress on these initiatives over time. No different than our HVAC project. An equivalent would be a few years ago, the Board of Education passed a resolution to put air conditioning in gymnasiums. The price tag was close to $100 million just to put air conditioning in gymnasiums. But to take that funding and just do it 1 year is not reasonable. So it's added throughout over time, and as we implement our programs, we add that element to projects throughout our implementation. And hopefully that makes a little sense.
Thank you.
Actually, Mr. Adams, I want to thank you for raising that great question, Mr. Kim, because even as we go through and move forward with our new projects, with our new projects moving forward, there are things that the price tag is just going to go up more than it has before because we are taking these additional pieces into consideration. Before it was the water bottle filling stations. That's an example of one that we talked about that we ultimately had the goal of doing in every high school. Now, same as gender-neutral restrooms, but addressing it from 2 different perspectives. As we're building projects, it's automatically included, but also thinking about all of the other schools. As Mr. Adams said, there are many that we have to just plan along the way. So some of these are just going to take a little longer, just for management of the price tag of what it's going to cost us to get across all of our schools. But I want to commend the team because, I know some years back, they were like, some of these we just need to take into consideration as we're building our schools right then at that point. I think that's a great way just to have us in a plan to work on it from both ends. So we ultimately get to where we want to be in all of our facilities. Thank you.
Okay, I think you can continue.
Okay, if you can bring back up the slides, please. So now we are going to talk about the Supplement A, which is the superintendent's recommendation for Clarksburg Elementary School number 9 boundaries. Next slide. So just to give a little scope and background, Clarksburg number 9 is being constructed to address enrollment growth as a result of the continued residential development up in the Clarksburg area. The elementary schools that were included in the boundary study were Clarksburg, William B. Gibbs Jr., Little Bennett, Wilson Wims Elementary Schools. There were no middle schools or high schools included in the scope of the study. The boundary study report was released in June of 2022. I believe it was towards the end of the month in June. The superintendent's recommendation was released in October, and I believe it was October 14th. And the Board of Education, of course, will take action on this boundary study at your November 17th work session. Next slide.
Just one point, and this is just to reiterate Ms. Wolf's comments at the beginning, but just from a boundary study process standpoint, so we will present the superintendent's recommendation today. Tomorrow, and I don't think this has ever happened where we go back to back, but tomorrow we will have a work session where we dive much deeper into obviously some of the funding elements, but we'll also revisit this. But the public testimony aspect, if an alternative is provided for consideration by the board, and it does not necessarily mean that you support it, it's just an alternative, that would allow the public to make public comments on both the superintendent's recommendation as well as any alternatives provided by the board during the 3rd, 9th, and 14th meetings. If an alternative is recommended at the November 10th meeting by the Board of Education, I believe there's still the 14th date that would allow for public comment, but ultimately, we would most likely have to look at a November 15th day as well to provide that additional time. So I just say that just from a process standpoint, in understanding what the public comments and the public testimony looks like and what its purpose is with and without alternative. So just wanted to clarify that going in, because we are meeting so quickly between today and tomorrow.
So I want to jump in because I was going to ask for a reminder, or just to bring up to the community too, that if we don't bring forward alternatives, they have to give their testimony based off of the superintendent's recommendation. But you just said that, so I think I'm a little bit confused. So we have to bring forward alternative by tomorrow, correct? Ideally, or the 10th. Okay. But if we wait until the 10th, then we would add an additional date. Okay, all right. But the community does need to understand, because oftentimes what they do is, if we don't bring forward an alternative, they come and speak to an alternative that they would like, right? And so, no, it is good to reiterate that. So thank you, Mr. Adams.
Okay, so this slide shows the current service area. The yellow is Little Bennett. The blue is Clarksburg Elementary School. The pink is, why am I losing my, the pink is WIMS, thank you. And the yellow, the sort of the tan color is Gibbs. So that is the current service area. To the right of the chart, to the right of the map, you can see the chart, which is the projections that we used when we conducted the boundary study. It was the 2021-2022 official, so it was last year's official, and then the projections that can be found in the CIP and the master plan. And those are the enrollment and projection information that we used for the boundary study. And you can see the most overutilized school is Clarksburg Elementary School. You can see that in the last year of the CIP, the 2027-2028 school year, the school is projected to be over 641 students overutilized. And then you can see we are building Clarksburg Elementary School number 9 for a capacity of 721 students. And then you could see the capacity and enrollment for the remaining schools, Gibbs, Little Bennett, and Wilson Wims. Next slide, please. So this demographic data information, again, for all of the 4 schools. We provided it for the 4 schools. We showed the average of those 4 schools, as well as the MCPS average. And again, this information was it was the 2021-2022 school year, so again, included in our CIP. Next slide, please. So community meetings, staff facilitated a set of 4 meetings, so a total of 8 meetings for the boundary study. We had a Spanish interpreter who was available at all of our meetings. The meetings were conducted virtually in the way that we have done it in the past when we've done virtual boundary study meetings. We ask those who are attending to put any question in the Q&A function. We go through the presentation, and then we answer all questions. At the first set of meetings, staff presented the following information. We do the background and scope, similar to what I just showed now. We provide the projections and available seats. We talk about the Board of Education policy FAA, and the 4 planning factors, which are what we use to develop the options. We talk about the boundary process, the schedule of meetings, and this time we actually did a survey, sort of a boundary study survey, and we asked a few questions regarding the factors. Yes, so we did that. So we actually had in this boundary study, we actually had 3 surveys. So the first survey was asking about the factors. The second asked about the first options that were developed, and the third survey was asking questions regarding all of the options that were developed. Next slide, please. So the first set of options meeting, we presented the results of the first survey. We reviewed the policy factors and the background information. We talked about the guiding parameters for the option development. And then we presented the 4 staff-developed options. So in the first round of options, there were 4 options that were developed. We did record and post one of those meetings. I believe it was the first meeting. We did post a second survey once those 2 meetings were done, and approximately 30 people attended those first sets of meetings. The second set of options meetings, we did base it on, we are always asked, how come you did a second round? We do it based upon, we look at what we developed as those 4 options, seeing whether there are anything else that we can do to make sure that we've done everything that we can to provide as many options as possible, but we also do it based upon stakeholder feedback. So in that second round of options, we actually did 2 more staff-developed options, and we did also provide the results of the second survey. The presentation, again, was recorded, posted on our website. After those 2 meetings were done, we posted the third survey on our website, and again, approximately 30 people attended those sets of meetings. Next slide, please. So our final community meeting, we always hold a final community meeting to just provide community members sort of what we did and where we're going. So we did review the boundary study process to date, meaning to date during that boundary study. The timeline for next steps, which is about our CIP process now, public hearing, and then action by the board. And approximately 10 people attended those sets of meetings. And again, the boundary study was released in June, the superintendent's recommendation in October, and all of our information from the very beginning up until Supplement A is available and is currently still available on our website at that following link. Next slide. So planning staff developed a range of options, again, 6 in total, to advance the following 4 factors, and these 4 factors are in the board's policy FAA. It's characteristics of student population, geography, stability of school assignment over time, and facility utilization. What we always say when we're developing our options, not every option advances every one of the factors. We try to look at each of those factors and then develop options that do advance those factors. Next slide, please. So again, option development, whenever we do option development, we take a service area and then we divide that service area into zones in order to come up with and develop options. All the schools are not considered in every option. And the guiding parameters that we always we consider, they are not part of the policy, but it's what we consider, of course, are the 4 factors, which is the first guiding parameter. But trying to maximize walkers, we always try to do that. In this case, grandfathering grade 5 students. In secondary schools, it would be grandfathering 8th or 12th. But in this case, it's only elementary schools, so grandfathering the 5th grade students, and minimizing island assignments, which are not contiguous boundaries. Those are our parameters that we try to incorporate in our option development where possible. Next slide, please. So review of issues. The Clarksburg Master Plan allows for the development up to 15,000 residential units. The plan includes 5 future elementary school sites, included 5 elementary school sites, and 1 future one. As you can see, we've built 4 of the 5 elementary schools. Little Bennett, again, William B. Gibbs Junior Elementary School, Wilson Wims, and Snowden Farm. Enrollment at Clarksburg Elementary School is projected to exceed capacity by more than 600 students at the end of the 6 years. And then the boundary study, just to give a little context, was approved to begin in the fall of 2020. However, the project was delayed, and so based upon the delay, we didn't conduct the boundary study until spring of 2022. And again, Board of Education action scheduled for November of 2022. Next slide. The district-wide boundary analysis, we did and do incorporate information from that analysis as we move forward in the boundary study process. That district-wide boundary analysis did review data across the school system as it relates to the 4 factors, which are the 4 factors that we use as well. The analysis noted that geography, such as population density and traffic corridors, impacts the creation of boundaries. The analysis report did note that there's an overwhelming support for students to attend schools close to their homes. And the data from the survey, our first survey, when we asked the community about those 4 factors, and based on those who responded, yielded similar results as the analysis, with more than 75% of respondents indicating that geography was the most important factor. The analysis report recognized that cluster boundaries may create an impediment to a boundary analysis. The Clarksburg Elementary School number 9 boundary study does cross over clusters. So we have some schools that are in the Clarksburg cluster and William B. Gibbs Elementary School, which is in the Seneca Valley cluster. When considering the diversity of a school as it relates to the policy factors, the analysis noted various viewpoints on that matter, and our surveys indicate that as well. Next slide, please. So to formulate the recommendation, the superintendent reviewed all and considered all 6 options, as well as stakeholder input that was received for the options in the context of the 4 policy factors. Superintendent also reviewed the boundary analysis to provide a comprehensive assessment of the boundaries, again, looking at those 4 factors. During the review process, superintendent asked staff to develop a variation of one of the staff-developed options. After review of all the information, the superintendent recommended a slight variation of option 1, believing it most advances the 4 policy factors. Next slide, please. So this is the superintendent's recommendation. The recommendation includes the following reassignments to Clarksburg Elementary School number 9, the new elementary school. It reassigned zones C7, C8, and C9 from Clarksburg Elementary School. And to William B. Gibbs Junior Elementary School, it reassigns zone C10 from Clarksburg Elementary School. And in the map, you can see, so the yellow is the new Clarksburg Elementary School number 9. It is those 3 zones, C7, C8, and C9. C10, which is being recommended to be reassigned to Gibbs, is in that tan color, and it is right under C7, C8, and C9. It is that big area, C10. It is the Royal Boyds. When we did a previous boundary study, it was that area. So that area is being reassigned in this recommendation to Clarksburg Elementary School. The blue from Clarksburg Elementary School to Gibbs. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what I said. The blue indicates the remaining Clarksburg Elementary School service area. The sort of greenish color remains Little Bennett, and the pink is Wilson Wims. In the recommendation, both Little Bennett and Wims do not have students that are reassigned out, and they do not have students that come in. They sort of remain as is, those 2 service areas.
I know you're going to go into this a little bit more tomorrow, but I have a couple of questions. I wanted to know when you held the stakeholder meetings. Do you have the dates?
The dates of the meetings, actually, I may.
Trying to figure out the timing and whether or not it was an optimal time, because the attendance was very low.
It was March and April. I don't know if we have it, but we certainly can get back to you with the exact dates. I don't think I have them in the recommendation.
Were they in person or virtual?
No, all the meetings were virtual.
Okay. And how many responded to the surveys?
So I don't, let me see if we have it, but I can tell you. I'm just looking to see if we have it. So survey information, let's see if we can. So there were 3 stakeholder surveys that were available in all 7 languages. Respondents provided input on the first 4 options for the second survey. Staff developed. A total of 206 people responded to the first survey, and 108 people responded to the second survey, and 119 people responded to the third survey.
How did you advertise the stakeholder meetings?
So all of the meetings, so they went through the principal. We sent out an email to the principal, to the PTA, to the cluster coordinators. We also did for every meeting, we did a Connect Ed to all of the schools. And we did a general Connect Ed, letting them know when the meetings were all scheduled. And then prior to each one of the meetings, we sent out another Connect Ed message. So the principals of the schools were aware of the meetings as well as individually through those Connect Eds.
Okay, if I could
And the
just,
cluster coordinators.
if I could get the dates of those meetings
Yes.
tomorrow.
And one aspect to this too, I think is very important, is that while this process was also ongoing, we were working very closely with the Clarksburg Elementary School community and worked through various options for relief this year. We went through a process to do liberal COSAs from Clarksburg to Gibbs, which we had quite a few families take advantage of. So there were, obviously, while we were going through the boundary process, there was engagement, but there was actually very different type of high-level engagement through this process with the Clarksburg Elementary community to navigate this particular school year too.
Did I hear you say that you worked with our partners such as I think it was Kappa, that had contacted us at one time, and I'm sure that the Parents Council, did you actually get them to send out to their membership?
So we sent out, when we do it, we send out an email to them as well and ask them to please share the information with their community partners as well. And so we did that. I would have to look and see, as far as attendance, whether or not who attended those meetings. I'm not sure that we captured that because it's a virtual meeting, it's a little bit more difficult, but they were all notified as well.
Night meetings?
We had, yes, for every meeting, they were night meetings. And they were two of the same meeting. So we had 2 first set of options meetings, 2 second set of option meetings. And again, they were also online as well.
Thank you.
Ms. Wolf, I just wanted to make a comment. I know this has been a question that's come up constantly as we go through and talk about the CIP, what are all the things that we do to engage families. I do believe that one thing that we heard from our communities that we've learned over time is to work with the school more closely, because we were trying to use the school to be, in addition to the partners, because I want to say it was 2 or 3 years ago, I remember sitting down and having that very important conversation about utilizing our partners to help us. But knowing that most of our parents are used to getting information from the schools, and we found that is the most dependable way to communicate to get their engagement, that would be a way that we tried to leverage, more participation. And this year we'll do the same, through these surveys, and then how we continue to engage with our community. We'll continue to work with the partners, but it's very interesting. I just wanted to bring that up because we talked about the school being that primary engagement and that them helping us through this process. And I want to thank our MCC PTA for that, because we met with their board recently. They talked about the importance of making sure that we were communicating about when the books came out and how they could then engage and help support that level of conversation within each school community, knowing what was in the recommendation.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I just know that I wanted to know about our partner groups because a lot of our constituents don't participate in the PTA. So I wanted to be sure that you were reaching out to be sure that they were receiving the information also. Ms. Harris?
I think Rebecca had her last.
I'm sorry, Rebecca.
Thank you.
I was going to get to her too.
That's okay, thank you. Can you just explain to me the difference between option one and the superintendent's recommendation? I can see that it's, just the one, well, from what I can tell, it's just about L6.
Correct.
But what does exactly, I've been trying to do the comparison into, what changes with it, and I'm just curious if you could just kind of talk me through that a little bit, especially because I'm guessing from the looks of the graph that it changes Little Bennett and Wilson Wims more than anything else?
Well, option one moved L6 from Little Bennett to Wilson Wims. So that only affected, of course, those two schools. What we did when we met with Dr. McKnight over the summer is, of course, we went through all the options. We went through the development that is still going on in Clarksburg. And that was sort of one of the things that we really talked about. Clarksburg, the service area for Clarksburg Elementary School still has some development. They will be impacted, not as much as the new Clarksburg number 9 that has still a lot of development left to go. Little Bennett did have a little development, and that is why when the options were developed, it was developed to give Little Bennett a little bit more flexibility. However, based upon, once we took a little deeper dive into what that development was, it is not as great a development. It was, I believe, multifamily or very small amount of development. So the flexibility that they currently have, because they do have some current space at their school, to provide additional space would have reduced their enrollment even more. And so that was one of the things that when we were looking at whether or not to do a slight variation of option one was one of the things that we did look at. The other thing that we did look at we were able to met towards the end of the summer, actually into September, and had preliminary enrollment projections. And based upon that, the numbers did change slightly. And so, again, having some flexibility at Little Bennett, we didn't need more flexibility at Little Bennett. And because it was a very small service area or a zone that we were talking about, the impact from them being reassigned, those students being reassigned to Wilson Wims, didn't really have an impact on demographics, utilization, or geography. And so that was the recommendation after talking about all of those things. That was the recommendation to do just the slight variation and leave that zone in Little Bennett.
And how come, I look like Mr. Adams wanted to say something, but can't get his light on, but go ahead.
No, I think in summary, in looking at the most current data, there was no reason to relocate Little Bennett students to Wilson Wims. So, the superintendent, through conversation, why impact families if there are no changes to utilization, demographics, or, there was just no justification at that point to implement that portion of this option one.
And may I also add, when we looked at the surveys and we were able to have the families identify what school they identified for from the surveys, that came loud and clear from that community to that, if it wasn't going to, make any adjustments in any different, in a big way overall, that they, not be impacted. And when we looked at all the multiple scenarios, we literally just could not justify it. And why not honor that if it wasn't going to help a problem we were trying to solve elsewhere?
Right, and I very much appreciate and respect that. I was more just curious about the fact that it wasn't put in forward as one of the options. And so just making sure that we have the information as to what the effects would be, because I think you all know me well enough to know that I would offer option number one, since that seems to be significantly prioritized in all of the different surveys. But if this just does the same thing, essentially, if it doesn't change anything, then I just want to make sure that the community is aware that is a difference from what they voted on.
And for communication, so that when the superintendent's recommendation comes out, we do the same exact thing. We send an email to the school and our partners, letting them know the superintendent's recommendation is out. We also send a Connect Ed to all the schools that were part of the boundary study, even if they weren't impacted, so that they know that the superintendent's recommendation is out and they can see it. The difference, again, between the superintendent's recommendation and one actually does not impact a group of students, so they remain at their school. So there was, if you look at the survey data, which I see that you're looking at now, option one was certainly an option there was a lot of consensus around. But the variation just does that, is option one impacting less students.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I know we're going to talk about these things in depth tomorrow, so I just wanted to let you know the major things that I want to get a better understanding of tomorrow. And the one is just drilling down on what Ms. Mondrowski just said, because when I look at the projections that you all provided, and looking at option one, which does reassign Zone L6 from Little Bennett to WIMS, that option does far better balance out utilization at those two schools in the long run. And so I want to get a better understanding of that. Now, I think one thing that might help me visualize a lot of this is looking at that map, if we could see something that indicates where planned but not yet realized development is. So we can see where we can anticipate additional residential in the out years. Because I think that is an important thing to keep in mind, because as we know, there's a lot of development going in up there. We want to minimize disruptions going forward. But the other question I have about, option number one, which reassigns L6, I just want to make sure, because WIMS and Little Bennett articulate to different middle schools. So I'd like to have an understanding if that was part of this calculus too. And then when I look at this big picture, what I can't help but wonder is, we take the largest zone here appears to be C10. L4 may be close, but C10 is big. And so we look at options that either send all of that area to new number 9 or send all of that area to Gibbs. And I just can't help wondering, and I first thought, why don't we leave the C10 as in one of the options articulating to new number 9? And I look at the projections, and that does put it at 97% utilization by the time we get to 27, 28. But and then when you reassign it this way, the utilization is a little more unbalanced. So I'm wondering, why can't we take C10 and split it in half and add a C11? So that's just an esoteric question. So those are my main questions. Where is the actual planned but not yet realized development, residential development? And then a better understanding of why the final recommendation is to leave L6 with Little Bennett instead of reassigning it to Wilson WIMS, because that looks like over time it evens out utilization better, and L6 looks closer to WIMS anyway if we're talking about geographic location. And then also, why couldn't we create an additional, like a C11, divide C10 into 2, make a C11, and then better balance out utilization between both number 9, Clarksburg number 9, and Gibbs? Those are the big questions I want to look at tomorrow.
Okay, so I'm going to try to answer. Unfortunately, I actually may not be here tomorrow. I may have jury duty tomorrow, so I won't know until tonight. So this will be left in Seth's hands. So I want to try to answer as many questions as I possibly can, and we can always follow up after tomorrow if there's something that we need to follow up on. But to answer a couple of your questions, so remember that when we do the superintendent's recommendation, we use the preliminary September 30th numbers. The other options do not have preliminary September 30th numbers. We only update those options if they are put on the tables as an alternative. So if you're looking at Little Bennett and you're looking at one of the options, you're looking at the prior enrollment projections, not the new enrollment projections. So I just want to make sure we're all looking at apples to oranges. The only projections that are new are the superintendent's recommendation. All the other ones are from the year before, from the adopted CIP. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing about C10, C10 has very few students in it. Very, very few. So to break it up, you may be talking about a handful of students going one way or another. We typically don't, we work internally and know the students that get reassigned from those zones. The reason why that's such a large swath is because there's such few students in it.
And there's no residential development plan in there?
No. That is what is called the rural voids. It's very established houses on very large pieces of property. And so that is why we typically do, when we look at taking the service area and putting them into zones, we do with the idea that we have enough students that they would go as a cohort, but not too many students that you can't come up with various options. In the case of C10 and even Little Bennett's, the zone up at top, there's very few students in there, which is why they look large, but they're actually not as large. Should that be a request by the board, we certainly can do that, but that does change because there are no other options. So that would be an option that we would have to come back and show you, and then if you wanted it put on the table as an alternative, of course you could.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one more clarifier here from the development. We'll definitely bring back that development, but a couple things that were themes in our conversations. Dr. McKnight really challenged us to again look at future development and its impacts to schools. The one thing that does stand out is Clarksburg Elementary is built for 352 students. So just understanding, what growth looks like at Clarksburg Elementary that built for 352 versus what growth looks like at the new Clarksburg built to over 700 students. They're two different. They are very different implications and ultimately impacts to the educational experience. So that is one thing that I think when we do show you that development. Just to keep in mind, though, because the older Clarksburg Elementary is very different than all the brand-new other Clarksburg schools built over 700 students that are feeding into them. So that was part of our discussion in terms of if that school is lower, what does that mean from the academic experience? Obviously, if it's above, what does that mean? So that was a big part of the discussions around future development, and understanding what existing school infrastructure looked like.
Yeah, and because I'm just assuming, because I'm looking at, with the recommendation that's here, WIMS is the biggest and the least utilized. So is that because we're looking at adjacent residential development that would naturally flow into WIMS is what I'm sort of expecting to see, given what we're seeing on paper? Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions on just the map?
I just wanted to clarify that the superintendent's recommendation also best utilizes walkability. Is that?
Yes, so in all of
That's
the
the
options, actually, are all walkers are maximized. We did not, in any of the options,
Okay.
None of the options had where we took walkers and made them bus riders.
Okay. Thank you.
And just also for clarification, Clarksburg Elementary School doesn't have any walkers.
Right.
Thank you, Ms.
Okay.
Evans.
Yeah, mine's just real quick. When did we take that bus tour? Right? Because I feel like it's I can remember some things, right? But it's not. I don't think it's fresh on everyone's mind to think about adding
last fall.
alternatives, right? Was it that? A year ago. Was it more than a year ago? Because Pat came with us, didn't you? Yeah, so we had it.
This
Yeah.
last, two summers, like not last summer, the summer before, I believe.
Before the pandemic, huh?
No, it was during the pandemic.
It was during the pandemic? Okay, okay,
Last year.
right.
Right, right, that's the one I'm thinking about, yeah, that's the one I'm thinking about.
Yeah, but that wasn't the one. But we did one specific for this boundary to begin thinking about it, right? And so that wasn't the one with the planning department. Can you squeeze one in there?
And that's a great point, because as part of Dr. McKnight's recommendation, remembering that bus tour, and if you recall, across the street was obviously just all open field, but that's major planned development. That's sort of that next phase of development. And so that part about walkers, we're working to install crosswalks, safety, pedestrian improvements across Clarksburg Road. So we really looked at that in terms of, as that develops, is that going to be part of the walk zone, and making sure that, obviously we're having provisions, for that space as well. So I was actually going to bring up the bus tour, because that was a big part of it, is just trying to understand what's there now, but also what's going to be coming in the very near future as well.
Thank you. And so the question we often get is, why do we leave the fifth graders, but we won't leave the fourth graders? Can you talk about that a little bit?
So historically, it's really just looked at it from the perspective of, if you're going into your last year of elementary school, you should ultimately be able to stay and carry out your elementary school sort of career within the school you started. If you start grandfathering further back, then you're basically saying multiple years at that point. And the idea is that if you transition to a new school and you at least have 2 years at a new school, it's less impactful than just changing after one. But that's just historically been the rationale behind the 1 year.
I knew that. I just wanted you to say it for the public. Thank you. Are there any other questions or concerns? No? Then I think we have come to the
Oh,
end.
is that the end of the?
No, actually,
you got two
I
more
think there's a
slides.
couple more
You know what,
slides.
I saw them and I thought, okay, they're for our information only when you didn't go to them.
So the next slide actually has the demographic information, which again, it's difficult to see here, but you all have in your packets the demographic information, and you can see, and this again reflects preliminary September 30th numbers. So these are updated numbers. These are the numbers that are in our CIP. And I think, I can go through if anybody has any questions. I totally can't see it. Let me turn around. You can see if we look at Clarksburg Elementary School, they go down to 92%. Again, Seth did talk about, their numbers. They will be at 315. That's what the projection is, but their capacity is only 342. They're a very small elementary school. The new elementary school, by the end of the 6 years, will have about 90% utilization. That was something that we talked about multiple times over the summer with the superintendent, because we know that there is still growth there. So leaving as much flexibility, it would be difficult to open the school at 50%, because Clarksburg Elementary School, of course, is so overutilized. But leaving as much flexibility as we can was something that we looked at. So that's at 89%. And you could see the first year, 2023, for Clarksburg Elementary School is only at 457. That's the no fifth graders. So that's why you have a jump from 1 year to the next, is because there will be no fifth graders at Clarksburg Elementary School the first year. Gibbs, you can see it's a slight change, a little bit more than a slight change from their, if they did not take, with the recommendation, they go to about 90% of 655 students. And then Little Bennett and Wilson Wims. Now, those two schools are with the new projections. So those do reflect the new projections, but no change to either one of those schools. So they would be at 92% and Wilson Wims would be at 82%. And we did talk about this too. We talked about, and Ms. Harris just, where the utilization is a little bit, they are a little bit lower. We do have pre-K coming. And so the idea of filling certain schools up, or schools that are going from half-day to full day, will change their capacity as well. So for the next couple of years, we will have some changes absolutely at our elementary schools, whether they're going from half-day to full day, changing the capacity, or just adding pre-K. And so if there's opportunities where we do have schools in a cluster that have some available space, putting another pre-K or a PEP program in, because there is definitely a collaboration between those two programs at schools where there is some space, is a good thing. Having just 10 or 15 seats doesn't give us that flexibility, but having 50 or 60 seats actually does. So it's a good thing moving forward when we have these changes from Blueprint as well.
Ms. Carmigas, thank you for reminding us. We've had these conversations since the summer, and we've taken so many things into consideration. But I appreciate you highlighting that, because it's similar to the question that Mr. Kim asked earlier in terms of how are we planning for expansion strategically. Well, that's another example. As we just opened up the Harriet Tubman Elementary School, we have pre-K in there. So really taking consideration of how the expansion is occurring for those areas that we're building. But we have significant expansion to do in response to the Blueprint requirement. And so you will see this is a perfect example of our conversation of how we taken that into consideration, because there will be a space issue. There already is. And so we're trying to take that into consideration in terms of little spaces that we're able to carve out so that we can utilize space within our schools as pre-K opportunity. And not honestly just to be compliant with the Blueprint, but this is an opportunity for us to bring our students into kindergarten being even more prepared, considering the learning needs that we are trying to address as a result of the pandemic. So that's important to us. I'm glad you brought that up again, Ms. Carmigas, because we want to share with our community that is another important part of what we're trying to do in being compliant with the Blueprint and the needs that are there. Thank you.
And if I can, I actually found the dates online because it's on our website, so I can give the dates of all of the meetings. The public information meeting, our first set of meetings, was held on March 9th and 10th. Our first round of options meeting was held on March 30th and 31st. Our second round of options meetings was held on April 27th and 28th. And our second and final public information meetings were held on May 4th and May 5th.
I have one question. It's about notice of the upcoming public hearings. I'm sure they went out to the community, again, that this particular community, that we're having a hearing on the boundaries.
To the schools.
Yeah.
So I know that comes from the board office. I was in conversation with the board office to try to figure out, because typically when we have a boundary study, we try to have those community members on one specific day, and then have, of course, all the clusters come on the remaining 2 days. And I believe that we have done that. So I think that the 3rd is the meeting for the boundary study, which is why when we talked about the alternatives, the earlier the better, if there are any alternatives to put on the table. So that is scheduled for the 3rd.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to be sure. Does anybody else have anything?
Is that the final slide?
That is, I believe, the final slide.
There's one.
Go ahead, Ms. Sylvester.
Yes, a couple questions. Mr. Adams, could you remind us why we only looked at elementary schools for this boundary study and not middle schools, and what's coming in the horizon in terms of a larger view of the up-county?
Sure, and that's a great question, because the boundary studies are two-part decisions. The first decision is the board makes the recommendation or makes the decision on the scope of work for the boundary study. Then ultimately the board comes back, makes the decision on the implementation of it. But for this particular study, at that time, the superintendent made a recommendation just to look at it from the elementary school level. Really knowing we came just finished the Seneca Valley boundary that impacted many of these communities. So the recommendation was just to look at it from the elementary school service area versus what ultimately would happen. But with that, we obviously took into consideration that many of the schools, actually, of all the schools that were in this scope, there are different service areas going into middle school. So as Ms. Karamias talked about, the split articulation of going from elementary, how many of your cohorts go to this middle school or that middle school, and vice versa, was a big part of obviously developing options and understanding it. But the scope itself was just at the elementary school service area. Moving forward, though, what we do know is that, obviously as part of the Clarksburg cluster itself, which is impacted by this, will also be impacted once we get to the Damascus High School addition. Again, the board has not made the final decision on the scope of work, but we anticipate that Damascus will be expanded in order to accommodate the secondary students at Clarksburg. And then even thinking further, when we look at the Crown High School is impacting many of the schools surrounding this particular area up around Seneca Valley. So it's Northwest, it's Quince Orchard, it's Richard Montgomery. It's really sort of that portion of students right below. And what we will have to really think through and have much more elaborate conversations on is those boundaries will be taking place concurrently. So at some point, maybe it makes sense to look at them together, because if you think about Poolesville, you think about, the upper part of the Gaithersburg cluster that we talked about, Magruder, Rockville, just sort of how it all fits together, and obviously Seneca, but we obviously just finished that one up. Understanding how they all fit together and ultimately implementing the district-wide boundary analysis in the bigger picture will be a big part of that next round work when we get into the bigger boundary studies. But this one was just purely, really just the final, as Adrian mentioned, the final phase of that master plan up in Clarksburg when they master planned 5 elementary schools. So, the development is continuing, but obviously slowing from what we saw from that rapid growth. And this is sort of the final elementary school service area movement as part of that large-scale Clarksburg master plan.
Thank you. So I think you're saying that we'll have an opportunity to look at the bigger picture when Crown and Damascus are being looked at. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that's
Understanding correctly?
absolutely. The high schools obviously are much more complex than the elementary schools. Historically, elementaries have just been at the elementary school service area. When you get into the secondary schools, whether it be middle or high school, that's when you start to see different influences from obviously the middle and high school service areas, and obviously they're much bigger than we think about from the elementary school. So one thing that will be very interesting as we start to think about the high school service areas, there seems to be some trends even from district-wide boundary analysis and even these surveys that elementary parents and families are much more much more focused on geography, staying close to their elementary school. When you start to get a little bit further out, I think you really start to hear about programming and access and other elements. So really understanding, is there a separation of, do we maintain the elementaries because they are there's a preference for geography, or are they part of the bigger scale cluster changes as we get into these high school boundary studies? It's going to be a deep dive that we all have to do, and obviously have some robust conversations with the community about.
Thank you. My second comment is back to the communication question that has been raised by Ms. Wolf and others. Could we just send another communication, I mean, if it is from the board office, Ms. Webb, just to dot the i's and cross the t's? There will be parents that will say, what? The board's looking at this week or next week? I didn't know. Just a one last reminder, the board's looking at it this week. There's going to be a public hearing. Here's your last chance to make sure that you are, in fact, in favor of the recommendation. Come tell us what you think about it at the public hearing. And then maybe for tomorrow, following up on Ms. Harris's point about where the development is, this is, Dr. Joftis, where we hear the numbers don't match up with what we're seeing at schools. And so I really want to understand that more fully tomorrow. If you're going to give us where the future developments are, I think that's still a concern. If the projections are off by more than 100 students, then what? I think the answer is portables. But just wanted to go deeper into that tomorrow. Appreciate that.
And no one likes to get a new school delivered with portables.
And just to clarify, in the Clarksburg area, though, I think this is really important. Many of the Clarksburg schools have been delayed over the course of the year, and that has not been of the fault of the Board of Education or of Montgomery County Public Schools as a whole. The new school that we're talking about now for the Boundary was scheduled and recommended by the board to open in 2020. So this year would have been ultimately the first year. So there have been a series of delays throughout the implementation of schools in the Clarksburg area, many of which where we did predict that there would be portables, particularly when you think about a school like WIMS, shortly after they open. But if the funding and the schedules maintained, that would be quickly alleviated by the construction of new schools. That was not the case here, and there were considerable delays throughout the implementation of this master plan. So some of this, while yes, it's been a massive inconvenience to many of the families that have moved up there, but if the schedules were met as the board had requested over the course of the years, we would not have seen the overutilization that we saw at WIMS, that we saw at Clarksburg. So I wanted to point that out because that sometimes I think is lost when families are in a school that's significantly overutilized, say, well, where's the planning? Well, the planning was there, there was not funding available in order to implement it in the schedule that was recommended.
Yeah, and then they want to know whether or not we should have gone back and replanned or whatever. But just to follow up on Ms. Silvestri's question about the middle schools, what is the impact with this superintendent's recommendation?
So there is no impact. So if I'm a student at Clarksburg Elementary School and I get reassigned to the new school, whatever my middle school is currently just remains. Whatever my high school assignment is remains. If I stay at my school, of course, my middle school and high school assignment does not change.
So if you're in one of these sections that goes from an L to a C or an L to a W or whatever it might be, your middle school you still go, you just are leaving different students than you would have from the elementary school.
Correct. So for example, C10, which I believe is the Rural Boyds area that's going to Clarksburg, that's going to Gibbs, they currently go to Neelsville and Seneca Valley. Gibbs goes to Seneca Valley and Neelsville. They are actually split articulated. They will then continue to go there. They don't change their middle school or high school. Clarksburg number 9 will be a split articulated school. There's C7 that will stay at Rocky Hill and Clarksburg, and the other 2 zones are already Neelsville and Seneca Valley. They will continue to be Neelsville and Seneca Valley. So middle schools do not change. Whatever you currently are is what you will continue to be.
So the only effect is
The only effect is elementary.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
So you're saying C9 and C8 currently go to?
Yes, and actually, if you bring up the map, you actually can see, if we could bring up the slide presentation, keep going. There's actually, and you may be able to see it better, I don't know if you can see it in there, but you may be able to see it in your packet. Right above C10, if you follow C10 all the way from the left, or C7, and then it goes up to where the new elementary school is, that's the cluster. That red line is the cluster boundary. So C10, C8, and C9 are all Neelsville and are in the Seneca Valley cluster. C7 is in the Clarksburg cluster. So that's what that red line is. It's the boundary between the 2 clusters.
And that's not changing.
That is not changing either, correct. That was established when we did the Northwest, Seneca, and Clarksburg boundary study.
But we are anticipating
Correct, and that's a high school, so then again, the scope would have to be scoped out, whether you're including middle school and elementary school, or you're just doing that, the elementary, middle would stay the same, but your high school would change. But that scope, again, has not been recommended or approved, that hasn't even been brought forth yet.
Any other questions? Well, seeing none, I think we've come to the end of today, and we'll see you tomorrow. Hopefully, we'll see you tomorrow.
We'll see.
And thank you very much. Really appreciate this.